Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the Pod in the Pendulum, the horror movie podcast covering all of the horror franchises, one movie and one episode at a time. As always, I am your host, Mike Snoonian, and there's no one else I'd rather have traveling alongside me for this carnival freak show, where we're carrying around the dusty old bones of Count Dracula himself than my Dracula expert, Mr. Brian Kuiper. Brian, how are we?
I'm doing okay. I don't know if I can qualify as a Dracula expert, but I'll do my best.
Well, a horror expert,
Well,
our classic cinema
classic
expert.
era horror. Sure. Okay. I'll take it.
But we are not alone, are we, today? We have the man who, even if he is pure by heart and says his prayers by night, he is a man who turns to a wolf when the wolfbane blooms. And I forget the rest of the poem.
And the autumn moon is bright.
Thank you.
There we go.
From the Cinema Spectre Film Club, Mr. Devaughn Taylor. Devaughn, how are we doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you very much. I would be a werewolf. I'm always werewolf over vampires because living forever sounds horrible. I could deal with a 1 monthly transformation every so often. You know, Lawrence Talbot makes it seem like way bigger deal. I could deal with that. Once a month. We're solid. It's all good.
Lawrence Talbot invents emo in the Wolfman movies,
Jeez
right?
Louise, what a
Just
baby.
like, oh, this beautiful Romani woman is in love with me, and once a month I have to lock myself up somewhere. What a giant whiny
For Alanka,
sad sack.
I would get over it. Get over it.
I know.
Get over it. Yeah.
Yeah, what a sad sack. All right, well, we are about to hit the home stretch of our Frankenstein series here, and we are in decidedly like far more lighthearted fare than like the thematically rich veins that we tapped into with like the first pair of James Whale movies. It is like really fascinating to see where Universal viewed horror movies, in particular Frankenstein's monster, by like the mid 1940s. Like, they are really shunting these movies to the side. It kind of feels like Paramount in the 80s with the Friday the 13th movies, where they're like, we'll make these movies because they make us money, but we don't have to like it.
Totally. I mean, there's the pretty much are assigning a director at that point and saying, hey, write it, and whatever you do, just bringing it under budget, you're good.
Yeah,
that's about it.
You can't show too much skin, and you can't make it too violent. It's pretty much it.
They're in the buy the game plan portion of the franchise at this point. It's just like, okay, we got the formula, and that's kind of how I feel that Friday the 13th is structurally. But at least here, they follow the formula, and it's like, okay, now we gotta shake it up. Now we're in the group films, or now we're in the versus films. So it's like at least they get a slight reset here, but at the same time, they're kind of in the groove of it.
And they're just, 40 years before the Monster Squad, where we thought that was like really innovative, how they're kind of like throwing like every monster on screen and how fun that is. Like, here's like Eric Kenton 40 years before, like just throwing everything but the kitchen sink on screen here with the House of Frankenstein.
Yeah, Monster Squad's an interesting thing too. I mean, I don't mean to go too far off subject, but
I already did that.
Awesome. I mean, one of the things with it is like, it's not a Universal film. It's what, TriStar, and they, just to show how little Universal cared about the monsters at that point, late 80s, that, okay, you can pretty much just use the makeup from Karloff. You can make Dracula look pretty much exactly like Bela Lugosi. It doesn't matter. We're good. Do whatever you want.
Oh, if Dracula wants to call a 5-year-old girl a bitch, go ahead.
That's right.
You know what? It's the 80s. That's what we do.
I know, and now think of that like in contrast to like the super limited stipulations they have, with like the superhero movies and whatnot, like especially with like the weird thing that Marvel and Sony have. They're like, okay, we have this character, you can't say this name, but you can use this character. But like, back for Monster Squad, they're just like, sure, yeah, go ahead, do whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, I mean, then in the 50s, when Hammer tried to redo them, they said, okay, if you have any resemblance with In Curse of Frankenstein to...
we see a bolt.
Yeah, if we see a bolt in his neck, it's going to be... we will come down on you with all of the power of the law to stop this movie. And so... which is incredible.
We will catapult Jack Pierce's body across the ocean and shoot him at you like a cannon.
Well, it's funny because in a few years, Universal was like, hey, let's partner up and let's make movies together. So
it's funny how that works.
Yeah.
It's funny how fortunes change in like a couple of years.
Money can help with those situations. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's some kind of news with Universal and the Universal monsters this past week as well, in that the Dark Universe is kind of sort of being resurrected as a theme park.
Right.
And the details seem pretty scant because I don't know about you guys, but I like Universal Orlando is my happy place. Like I've gone there a couple times. It's like when I graduated from grad school, it's the first place, like literally the day my class ended. The next morning I shunted my family onto a plane in July and like we're running around Universal Orlando because I want to run around Hogwarts going, I'm a fucking wizard, Harry. Like that's what I wanted to do after 2 years of school. And then we went last April break and it was amazing. And I rode the Velocicoaster and thought I was going to die. And it was the most fun experience of my life. My daughter was like, this is incredible. I love this ride. It's amazing. And I'm like, I never want to ride this again. I'm going to die. I will just stick to the Hulk coaster forever, but I'm glad I did this. But it looks like they're going to bring back like the Bride of Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, Dracula, the Invisible Man. And are they replacing rides and just rebranding them as like Dark Universe rides? Or are they building a la like the Super Nintendo park, like a whole new Dark Universe like section of the park for Universal? Or do we even know?
I don't think so. I mean, I mean, you know how people get whenever certain rides are taken away. So I feel like we would have been hearing that already, like, oh, what is it replacing? We would have already heard like on the murmurs of you better not touch this thing that nobody's ridden in 10 years. But yeah, so I'm not exactly sure, but I mean, I think it'll be interesting though.
Well, they took away the Monster Cafe.
Right.
And it made me incredibly sad. I'm like, I never went there, which was my fault. But I'm but I wanted to eat overpriced chicken fingers branded like the Bride of Chicken Fingers, like
absolutely,
the invisible. I wanted to have like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's fruit punch for $12 in like a little steamy cup. And it just made me sad that like that's how little they thought of like the monsters at this point, which is what built Universal. It was just going to become like another Minions attraction. It's like, oh God, do we really need another one of these?
Well, it's so, I feel like we're sort of, and I've mentioned this in some ways before, we're in sort of this Frankenstein renaissance. I mean, we've got Lisa Frankenstein coming out in a week or so. Poor Things is nominated for Best Picture, and that's got a lot of Frankenstein influence. Maggie Gyllenhaal's Bride of Frankenstein remake is announced as going forward. Of course, we're getting cast news on Guillermo del Toro's movie. So it's just feels like Universal is saying, hey, these things are kind of hot again. So let's pull this corpse back out that failed before and see if we can shock it to life is what it feels like.
And it's fascinating too that like we're getting this Frankenstein renaissance, but yet the Dracula movies have like did not do at least well like financially or like so like they don't seem to be as hot, but people are loving the Monster Man.
Yeah, it's true. It's a shame, because Renfield and Last Voyage of the Demeter didn't do very well. I think that killed Karen Kusama's Dracula,
Yeah.
which is a shame. So,
Yeah, that is a shame. I would have loved to have
mhm.
seen it. These things come in cycles, but it should be interesting. I would love to see, because I'm a theme park nerd anyway. Like I just love roller coasters.
Oh, I know.
Like love
We're
them.
actually going this summer, and then I saw that news hit, and it's like, really? I,
Yeah.
not okay, whatever. So,
So in a few years when it opens up,
right,
we'll definitely have to make a return trip.
for sure.
But let's move on. Let's talk
Yes.
about the House of Frankenstein. Let's talk a little bit about this movie. And we're not quite in horror comedy territory yet. It's not going to really be until we get to like Abbott and Costello. But there is like a certain flair and aspect of like camp with these next two pictures. It's undeniable. Everyone seems to know what kind of picture they're on board for. No one's really taking things like too seriously, and everyone is kind of just sort of having a good time with this, right? I mean, that's kind of like the general feel I get here. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, it seems like especially Karloff is just chewing the scenery. He's having the time of his life. And he's like, okay, let's, and
yeah.
we'll talk about that when we talk about the movie, because I don't know. He's my favorite thing about it.
He's so happy that the only makeup he has to put on
Is
is like
that
that
beard.
fake beard
Exactly.
for a little bit,
Yeah.
And I'm sure that Jack Pierce was like, "Well, let me individually glue on every hair," and he's like, "No, Jack, we're not doing an 8-hour makeup job on this beard. Like, I just brought a fright rig from like the novelty shop. It came with an exploding cigar. Like, that's what we're doing for this movie." Okay.
Again, I didn't see Son or Ghost of Frankenstein, but as far as like compared to like the earlier ones, this one does have like a bit more of it just has a little bit more fun energy to it. Like the drama is a little bit more melodramatic rather than it kind of being as more serious. There's not as much philosophizing throughout this film as well. It's like it really does kind of have quite a different energy compared to the earlier ones.
It feels to me in a lot of ways like a continuation of the energy of Frankenstein meets the Wolf Man,
Oh yeah.
as opposed to Ghost, which tries to take itself, I think, too seriously. And so it's a nice, it hits the tone about right, I think, for what it is.
Obviously, after the success of like Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, Universal knew there's one solution, like more monsters. It was the more cowbell of its day,
Yeah.
basically. We need more monsters in here. We have a Frankenstein. We have a Wolfman. We got to add the other big guy in here. We got to add Dracula into the mix. But before they get to that decision, they have like other permeations and other mixes and matches they're going to do. So in June of 43, Universal announced the title The Chamber of Horrors, where originally was going to be The Invisible Man, The Mad Ghoul, which had been a title that had come out to some critical and financial success the year before, The Mummy, and some other assorted bad guys would kind of meet up with one another. George Wagner was set to produce, Karloff, Chaney Jr., Lugosi, Peter Lorre, Claude Rains, Henry Hull, who had been the werewolf in The Werewolf of London. They were all set to at least star or appear in the movie in some shape or form. And obviously, like, this movie never got made. Variety at this time is making all sort of announcements about horror titles that never came out. And to be quite honest, like, they make so many announcements about so many titles, you kind of just wonder if they're just making them up to see if they're going to hit on one of them. Like, what sounds at least plausible, and if they're going to, like, stick on something. And they include, like, a Val Lewton title called The Creep by Night. That would include a lineup of Dracula, Frankenstein's monster. Because remember, these are public domain characters, so anyone could make a Dracula movie. Correct? I mean, am I wrong in this? Are they public domain now?
Dracula, I think, was public domain by that point.
Okay.
It hadn't been in 31, though, when they
That's
made
true.
the first one. Frankenstein's monster most definitely was. Interesting, the Invisible Man cat people being part of that, considering that the cat people are never seen in cat people,
Right.
that would be a challenge. Yeah, this sounds like bullshit to me because
Yeah.
Val Lewton, I don't see him
This is
touching
not
something
his
like
kind of
this
movie.
with a 10-foot pole.
Right.
Yeah.
They're just throwing words out there and seeing what catches. And I mean, and the speed at which they're able to make these, like, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility for, like, they get a little bit of buzz going back. All right, get the script going now. I'll see you in 3 days.
This sounds to me like an RKO executive spouting his mouth off, and not actually something that came from Luton or anyone in that filmmaking unit at that time. There's just I just don't see it.
Right. A lot of scotch being poured, a lot of cigars being smoked.
Yeah.
You know, late night at a bar, and you got like some off the record conversation, quote unquote, and then some reporter at Variety just deciding, what if we run with it? But they were like, that was one example of like,
maybe they were all at the
listed.
Lionel Atwill orgy and just having this conversation.
Goodness. Can you imagine?
And
Variety would print like Lionel Atwill is going to release his like the stag people, and then you realize no, it was a stag party, and if we release that, we're all going to prison.
Right.
So Chamber of Horrors was the original title. It gives way to the movie title, The Devil's Brood, which would be the shooting title, which would then become The House of Frankenstein. And that prep for that would begin in August of 1943. The cast wasn't actually put together until February of the next year. And to give you an idea of like where the cast was in terms of the pecking order, here are the respective salaries for the performers. Karloff was going to get $20,000 for fulfilling the second film of a 2-picture deal with Universal. And from what I could tell, it looks like the first movie of that deal was The Climax, which was directed with George Wagner, and also came out in 1944, and also sounded like the title of a movie that Lionel Atwill would have been interested in at that time.
It was more or less a sequel, or intended to be a sequel to the Phantom of the Opera. I haven't actually seen that movie. I own that movie. I haven't seen it yet. It's one that I've heard is not very good.
Right.
But anyway.
You had said that like at this is right before he goes to work for Val Lewton. Karloff does.
Yeah. So after this, Karloff would go and start shooting Isle of the Dead with Val Lewton.
And Body Snatchers the next year.
Well, what happened was during the beginning of the shooting of Isle of the Dead, he had to have back surgery. So he just couldn't continue. He was a trooper. He tried to do it. They shut down production entirely. He recuperated. And while they were getting the cast back together for Isle of the Dead, it was going to take a little time to get all of that back together. They made The Body Snatcher before it, which is before finishing Isle of the Dead. And The Body Snatcher, I think, is kind of a masterpiece. It's
he should have been nominated for that. There.
I mean, his performance is remarkable, but the movie itself, I don't know. It's hard to pick a favorite Lewton, but I mean, it's really a great one.
No. But I think you had said before, like Karloff went so far as to say that like Val Lewton saved Karloff's career, kind of rescued him from doing these lower tier pictures with Universal.
It was between
not so great.
Yeah, it was between Lewton and going to Broadway to do Arsenic and Old Lace that really sort of reinvigorated him as an actor. He never really complained about being a horror typecast in the horror realm. But I imagine eventually, you do anything that's sort of in the same vein for too long, you're gonna want to stretch your limbs a little bit.
And that's probably why he like started switching the characters around too, to like kind of keep himself fresh as Karloff carries this franchise on his back.
Well, the nice thing about the Lewton movies is he really plays a different role in each movie. In the Columbia films, he's kind of always playing the same character. Here, he gets to really go for it as Dr. Neiman. I mean, he's not taking it too seriously. He's like, let's just have a good time. He knows who his audience is, and I think he gives a very fun performance. So
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, he never phoned it in, even if he didn't
No.
think the material was great. He always
And
went for it.
And I'm sure if there ever was a private moment where he felt like, I'm tired of doing these films, even if the money is very good, like he wanted to do more as an actor and he was tired of like getting these roles offered to him, he could look at his friend Lugosi and see what Lugosi was going through,
Sure.
like doing the poverty role films, if he was getting anything at all, or like really not getting any pictures offered to him and having to like tour the country doing 1 week stints playing Dracula on stage in these like 500 seat theaters and having to like tour doing that in his 60s, and what must have been like really like backbreaking work and like exhausting work.
Absolutely.
Just to stay financially solvent. Like Karloff would look at that and be like, well, that's the alternative. Like that's what I could be doing. And then sing like, oh, I will gladly take 20 grand to play a mad scientist for a month or two.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I mean, the shooting schedule on these, I can't imagine being very
That's
long.
a month.
Yeah.
No, it's a month.
At most, yeah.
Cheney Jr., he's going to make 10 grand for his third appearance as the Wolf Man, which makes sense. Like he's the kind of the, appears midway through and he's kind of gets a lot of screen time, probably the most behind Karloff for the second half of the movie. John Carradine and J. Carol Naish, who plays Port Daniel, they net 7 grand apiece. Lionel Atwill and George Zuko, they make $1,750 and $1,500 a piece for really what are essentially like single scene, 2-scene cameos. They're in and out. Like Atwill has gone from being one of the featured players in the first couple appearances. Like he only has one more appearance in this series with House of Dracula. He's now an afterthought. Like now he's really entangled in that scandal. He's become kind of person non grata. And they're maybe just throwing him a bone at this point. And it's a shame because he's, for the 1 scene or 2 scenes he's in briefly, he's quite good. Like I still like watching Atwill perform. He's got those pipes and, it's kind of sad. And by 1946, like he's passed away from cancer, which is really sad.
Yeah. I think Atwill really does have a lot of charisma in these roles.
Oh, yeah.
And he makes the most of even the smallest parts. And I love that about him on screen. It's very compelling every time I see him. Yeah.
To kind of give you an idea of like what an afterthought Glenn Strange as the monster is in this movie, and like how far Frankenstein's monster has fallen in his own damn series. Glenn Strange makes $500 for his first turn as the monster.
That's crazy. Atwell and Zuko get more for cameos, while Strange is doing. Strange even has to do a stunt in his at least one scene that that he is in. He's got a stunt in there, so I mean, it's got to give you.
Yep.
But they said no, none for you, Glenn Strange.
He's picking people up. He's throwing them.
Yeah.
He's sinking in quicksand.
Mm-hmm. His head goes all the way under. Yep.
So they don't think much of Glenn Strange. They don't make much of Frankenstein. And that is, we talked about this early on, Brian. We talked about how by the time we get to the back half of the series, it's really not. And maybe that's why when we originally pitched the idea, we're like, well, we'll do the Karloff movies. Because really, by the time you get to like Meets the Wolfman, it's really not a Frankenstein series anymore.
No.
It would be like, if you, in the Friday the 13th movies, it's like eliminating Jason for 95% of the movie and like focusing on just the teens, right?
Sure. So Jason goes to hell. No,
I mean,
well, you're not completely wrong, except that
I know it's
like,
a different thing.
It's a different thing.
Yeah,
but you're not wrong.
Yeah.
Like it would be like that if that's where the series went. If Jason Goes to Hell was like the last 3 movies in the series, that's what it would be like. I mean, and my God, it feels like he's De Niro in Raging Bull in terms of the amount of screen time he gets when you compare it to House of Dracula next week.
Oh, I know.
Like,
It's
blink and you miss it.
I mean,
pretty much.
I do like how Frankenstein, though, it almost became more of just like kind of the legacy name of it all. Because obviously, like, yes, a lot of people, when you think of Frankenstein, first thing you think of is the monster. However, it's like, this series is just kind of all these different ripple effects that Dr. Frankenstein himself has had. So it's like everything is still stemmed from him, even if it is not focusing on the monster itself, because it all still does revert back, to that same guy.
True.
Well, I think Karloff, even after Son of Frankenstein, he was sort of like, I think we've milked this idea for all it has. So that's why he didn't want to play the monster again more than anything, I think. I mean, frankly, James Whale was saying he got all these ideas out in the first movie, which turned out not to be true because, Bride is a very complex and rich film. But the idea of, the creature only has so much breadth that you could really explore. It's the doctor really that has the pathos and and so many of the sort of complexities that you can explore, I think, for longer through a film series. And that's why I think the Hammer series takes the focus onto the doctor. Because I think it's sort of carried out, by the Universal films, what can be done with the monster.
Well, the creature is really a siphon by the middle of the series, and it's how other characters react to the creature, like what they think of the creature, how they react to it, whether it's a child, whether it's like one of the mad doctors, whether it's one of the villagers, whether they're able to show it, like whether it's Larry Talbot who actually befriends the creature and actually shows it some great care and actually sees maybe his own plight mirrored in like what the creature is going through, and how they're able to like react to the creature and maybe show it some care. And even Igor, who, for all of Igor's foibles and all of Igor's, kind of evil, he does rob graves and murder some people, which technically not a good thing to do. How you react to the creature is kind of like a mirror of like how you are as a person in terms of your morals and your ethics, and that's what the creature is a stand-in for at that point.
Yeah, I think so.
It's a siphon. So,
yeah.
All right. So our old friend Kurt Siedelmack, he does get a story credit for this one, but he is adamant about letting others know he did not write the script. He's like, look, didn't write the script, came up with a story. He said, just get all the monsters in it. I gave them some ideas, didn't write it, never even watched it. So I guess his new car that he got for writing Meets the Wolf Man, it was still running pretty well. He didn't need the work that bad. The actual screenplay is written by Edward T. Lowe, who had a lot of history in horror. Like he had written the script for The Hunchback of Notre Dame in 1923. So kind of interesting. You have another Hunchback here.
Yeah. And he had a Romani character,
Yeah.
So, there's some similarities in that relationship.
Going into that well, like digging back in. Yeah. And he written The Vampire Bat in 1933. The Hays Code came back with some notes like, hey, when you film this, the Romani dancing scene could not be too suggestive, like no excess gyrations. I did when I was rewatching it and she's twirling, I'm like, I hope she's not showing like underwear. And I'm like, I was literally watching for that. Like, she's showing a little bit too much. Like, is the dancing too suggestive?
Put those hips away. There's children in here. You're going to give us a heart attack. Put those hips away.
Absolutely. Like, look, Ilanka can get it.
Yeah.
Like, give me that. We've moved away from these like haughty blondes, and now you're going to these raven-haired beauties with Ilanka. Like, I'm all for it. No excessive gruesomeness, which none of these movies are gruesome, and like there's a particular note, like you had to handle Lapini's strangulation with restraint. Like, you could not be overly grotesque. So.
I mean, I guess is that the reason that like every action scene is like in the shadow, or like they do like the shadow on the wall to kind of get around a lot of these. I mean, we really only see someone getting like actually strangled on screen for, I don't know, maybe 3 seconds, if that. Probably. And then after that, it's like, Daniel, like pushing them out of frame and then doing it like kind of over there.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because there are actually like more brutal murders in the early films. Like in Frankenstein and Bride, you actually see strangulations. You see him throw the woman down into the well of beneath the mill and everything. Yeah. I mean, so it's just sort of interesting how more tightly enforced the Hays Code is by now, even than it was in 35 when it was just first starting to be enforced.
Do you think is all of that Hays Code, or do you think by the mid 40s, because it's no longer like part of it is it's no longer Lamelli, and Lamelli sees his films as like art projects, like there's bigger budgets, there's bigger sets. James Whale is an auteur. Lamelli sees like the Frankenstein movies and the monster movies as real kind of prestige projects. And this movie is going to get combined with The Mummy's Curse as a double bill that's going to go into like Nickelodeon theaters. And like kids will go like for 25 cents. You get 2 movies, a popcorn, a newsreel, a soda. Like, is that part of it as well?
I think so. The demographic is certainly geared towards children in this situation. Yeah,
and they gotta get people to see the Mummy movies one way or another. Sorry, Mummy movies are boring.
Wow, some mummy on crime there.
And I think there's also a level of sensitivity to violence too, because the war is going on, and I think people are coming back injured and things of that nature. So I think there's probably more awareness of those things. Like during this time, it's like I watched Casablanca, for example. There's a part where Peter Lorre, who's wearing a white suit jacket, gets shot in the back and he falls over, but there's no bullet hole. There's no, you hear the bang and he falls over. I mean, so it's sort of like so much of the violence is suggested at this point in movies. And I think there are probably a lot of reasons for that. The Hays Code being just one of them. But movies were also they were made for all audiences at this time. There was no rating system, so there's no tiered version of this. It was general audiences for every movie.
Yeah.
And
we're a few years from Universal getting out of the horror business for quite a while.
Yeah.
Like making a conscious decision to say like, we're not doing horror anymore. We're like, that's not who our audience is. Like, we want to do prestige pictures.
Yeah, I mean, I think they sort of threw that away when they were like, you know what, we've had one movie ever that's been nominated for Best Picture, and it was All Quiet on the Western Front in 1930. And so let's make movies that make money, right? So they came back to it before too long. But you're right, there was a period where they were, I think, attempting to make genre fare that was not horror, like a lot of westerns, things like that.
Or they might call it like psychological thrillers.
There you go.
Like, and it's funny, in doing some reading, like we talk about like the 90s was that pivot where like is Silence of the Lamb a horror movie? No, it's a psychological thriller. Like that was what directors were calling their movies in the early 90s.
Sure.
And that seemed like a new phrase then, but like that was a phrase that was coming up in like the 1940s when directors were trying to remove some stigma away from horror movies. Like they did not want to be seen. And maybe part of that is because there was an association of like horror and monster movies at the time, and not so much. They were moving towards like a more psychological edge.
And I think monster movies, as we see with Abbott and Costello series, they had become a joke.
Yeah.
Even by this point, people were looking at them, oh, that's kids stuff.
No.
Which, isn't bad necessarily. It's just, I think, how people were viewing them.
So what's not a joke is the budget. It gets a pretty decent one. It's like $350K. It is a step down from the early Frankenstein pictures, but it's not too bad for like what's a quickie. Eric Kenton is coming back. He had directed Ghost of Frankenstein, which we had talked about not being a huge fan of just his direction on that one, but we'll talk about what we think of it here. They're repurposing sets from movies like Green Hell in Pittsburgh, the medieval prison set, and the underground tunnel, respectively. And a set from Green Hell is going to be used as the Frankenstein ruins.
Incidentally, Green Hell, directed by James Whale.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just kind of an
So a
incident.
little touch
Yeah.
there. Excellent. Okay. Art directors John B. Goodman and Martin Obzina, they're taking advantage of leftover sets from Gung Ho and the Tower of London. And you see like some beautiful like matte painting work here done here, like especially when you get to the Romani camp and you see that far off painting of like the ruined Frankenstein castle. Like you can tell it's a matte painting, but it's also like beautifully done, so I don't really mind that.
I always kind of like the matte paintings in these movies. I think they offer sort of. I really like the one like in Dracula, where they're coming up to Castle Dracula, and it's clearly the whole background is matte, but there's something, the surreal look of that sort of adds to the fantasy of it all. I think in a really special way.
I'll always love matte paintings. I want them to come back. Like, I think there needs to be a trend of, because like even though like yes, like you can like see something and like it might not blend like totally perfectly, but like you said, like kind of adds to like you are watching a movie, you are like in this like kind of more fantastical world. Kind of also like lends to like kind of the literary vibes that have always kind of permeated through these as well. Like kind of it looks like you're like a book cover.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, well said.
I would take that over like green screen.
Oh yeah,
I think
honestly.
any day. I think there's still something much more tangible to it there. I would agree.
Like I think the rear, like especially in driving scenes, like to this day, like you can always tell when a driving scene is up against a green screen now, and it's just like, and it kind of takes you out of it for a minute. Like we discussed in like When Evil Lurks, that's like one of the like few blemishes on that film is like the green screen in the car looks so whack, and it's just like bring back, put the paintings behind it, and let's do it that way. Because at least if you're gonna do it and like it's not gonna sell as well, at least make it look prettier.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm all for that. And I'm sometimes okay with a little bit of artifice, letting us know that like, we're in a movie. We are playing make pretend, but there's something a bit more artistic about it. So I'm all for that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the cast, and I think we're going to talk about John Carradine a bit more next week when we talk about House of Dracula, unless anyone here has any initial thoughts about the career of our mustachioed Dracula. The only note that I had about his career is he does resemble Mr. Peanut with fangs in this movie.
Well,
if that gives you an idea of what I think of John Carradine's turn as Dracula.
Well, what's interesting to me is John Carradine actually kind of looks more like Bram Stoker's description of Dracula than Bela Lugosi does, or Christopher Lee, or any of those sort of iconic versions, right? Because he does have this sort of whitish hair and the mustache and the totally black clothes and things like that. But I don't know. I think it's an okay performance. It doesn't. It's not. He's no Lugosi. He's no Gary Oldman or Christopher Lee for sure. Christopher Lee, I think, is, for my money, probably the greatest screen Dracula.
Same.
But yeah. I'm like, it's okay.
It's an awkward introduction because like we're like when we're introduced, he's like, like all like scared and like, like, oh yeah, get that steak away from me. And then just like, okay, I'll do whatever you want. It's like, wait, what version of Dracula is this? Like, like he kind of didn't have like any assertion to him, and like, and John Carradine, not exactly sexy, at least not in the Dracula type of way. He's not very alluring. He's quite off-putting. He has like these like very intense eyes, throughout the film. Which, I mean, I guess goes along with, like, you know, Dracula and being able to hypnotize people, things like that. But at the same time, it's like, you know, there's, with the other versions, it's like, oh, you understand why somebody would be allured towards Dracula without him having to use his, you know, powers of persuasion, versus it feels like this version is all power of persuasion. Like, nobody is getting charmed by this version, which isn't a bad thing. I don't think like he's bad per se. It's just different and very odd.
Yeah. We'll definitely talk more about the performance, and we'll talk more about the character in a few minutes. And next week we'll talk a little bit more about the career of Carradine. There are defenders of his performance here. I did pull up a quote from the book Universal Monsters, which has been like a really great resource for the back half of these movies, where there's not as much literature as there is for obviously Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, even Son of Frankenstein. For these lesser movies, like, this has been like a tremendous resource for research. And for whatever reason, the authors of this book are like absolutely gaga for Carradine. Like, I'm like, am I reading this right? Like, I had to go back and reread it. Because I read it pretty late at night. I'm like, I must be missing something here. So they're like, this is the quote and what they say about his Carradine's turn as Dracula. John Carradine has gotten a well-deserved share of applause over the years for his classy performance as Count Dracula. There are those of us who prefer Carradine's enactment to Lugosi's, even though his eccentric Shakespearean lacks those elements of loneliness and tragic resignation that Lugosi brought to the part. Supposedly, Lugosi was considered for the Dracula role in House of Frankenstein, but was forced to bow out on account of other commitments. I've heard that for House of Dracula, but not this one. Carradine's Count is the devil incarnate, seductive, ruthless, without conscience. His subtle underplaying and impeccable appearance give the character a genuine air of distinction. I don't know what movie they watched. I see that stupid little top hat, and I just see Mr. Peanut.
That's funny. Well, you know, one of the things that I've heard is, like, Francis Coppola, he was talking about when he went to make Dracula, that his experience with Dracula that scared him as a kid was John Carradine.
That I see.
Yeah. Because he didn't see the Lugosi movie till much later, and so I find that interesting. Also, you know, Lugosi wears a top hat in Dracula, in the opera scene while he's briefly.
But Carradine makes it his whole personality.
What was funny is, you know,
films.
he even carries it, of course, in the House of Dracula, but it's also in Billy the Kid versus Dracula, which is something. If you want to see a movie that is definitely a movie you saw,
I don't. I would prefer not to do any of those things.
That's all good, and I understand. It's the same kind of thing. I think he was more drunk on that movie, though. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I don't really see this. Devil incarnate, like kind of like a ruthlessness. Like in this one, he's more confused than anything. He's like, you know, he's like kind of a dog that just got, you know, woken up from going under from surgery, and he's just like, okay, where am I at? What am I doing? Where do you want me to go right now?
Who's a good boy?
Literally, like that's this version of Dracula.
Who's a good Dracula?
I do find it you're right though. His reaction when the stake gets taken out of his chest and he sort of reforms and he's like, "Oh my gosh, you have a stake." I mean, it's and he tries to get Karloff to put the stake down, and he can't even do that. It's like,
yeah,
you know.
I see where Coppola's coming from, especially in the next movie, because there's a confrontation that feels like the whole like Oldman and Winona Ryder romance is not lifted but inspired directly from that in the House of Dracula. So I can definitely, and I think I even noted that here, so I can see that more romantic angle being lifted there. But we'll talk more about that in the movie discussion in the next film. I do want to talk about Glenn Strange, because we never may get this opportunity again, because he is going to take over the monster role for the rest of the series. And for like non-monster or horror fans, he's probably going to be best known for Westerns. He appeared in 222 episodes of the television series Gunsmoke, which was like a long-running Western television show, like a staple of like broadcast TV for years. It was like the number one show for years, and you just like everybody watched it. I mean, I think I watched reruns as a kid. Like I was vaguely familiar with it.
Yeah.
He appeared up to his death in 1973, where he died of lung cancer. And he appeared in like hundreds of Western films and television shows. Like he had like over 300 credits to his name over the course of his career. Before his acting career, he was an actual cowboy. He worked as a rancher, a rodeo performer, he worked as a sheriff's deputy. He'd perform as a singing cowboy with his cousin on tours of the Southwest. He'd perform on the radio. And then for the first time, he was in front of a camera as a harmonica playing extra in the movie The Mounted Stranger in 1931. And again, like of his 300 film and television programs, like 95% of them were Westerns.
Yeah.
Hey, sometimes you don't have to act. You just live your life on screen.
Yeah. You know? Maybe they just thought they were documentaries. They were just like following him around filming. 6'5", so the most physically imposing of anybody that played the monster. He had the size to play the heavier the bad guy, so that's what he did in most of his roles. And the legend had it that like none other than Jack Pierce was making him up for like one of the Western movies he was appearing in. And Pierce looked at him, sized him up, and said, "Look, I'll offer you some cash to stay after tonight. I want to try some makeup experiments in you." And Strange was like, "Yeah, I can definitely do that. I can make a few bucks." And when Pierce like finished putting the makeup on him, like Strange's first remarks were like, "I look like Boris Karloff." So Pierce is like, "Yep, that's kind of what I was going for here." So I guess he was like playing with the monster makeup. That had to be. I don't think he was trying to make him look like physically Boris Karloff.
Well, of all the actors that are not Karloff to play the monster, he's the one that looks the most right in the makeup. Yeah. I mean, by far, it's not even close. So he's got the nice long sort of angular face like Karloff does. Obviously his size helps. He's very tall.
The flat top looks good.
Yeah. Everything. He just, I don't know. I think he became, for a while, he became more identifiable as the monster than Karloff was. Just because he played it all the time. I mean, he would make television appearances and things like that. And like personal live in-person appearances. So he did everything as the monster for a long time. There's even some pictures going around of like the monsters playing baseball. And there's people are like, "Oh, that's Boris Karloff." It's like, I'm not so sure. I think it might be Glenn Strange doing that because it's hard to say because you can't really get it's not a really close-up picture.
I also can't picture Karloff playing baseball.
No, I mean, he had rickets and he had, just horrible bowing in his legs and his back problems and everything.
Can you picture Boris Karloff legging out a triple?
Probably not.
Well, he was a cricket player. He was quite a good one, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. So he helped found the Hollywood, cricket society or something like that.
How many people were in that?
It was a few.
Boris Karloff and like two other dudes.
Yeah, it was like a little group of British actors living in Hollywood, and it was just sort of this funny thing. But they actually had a regular game going for a while. It sounds like, yeah.
When Karloff passed away in 1969, the New York Times, when they published his obituary, they accidentally used Glenn Strange's picture of himself in the monster makeup rather than Karloff's picture. Like, that's how well known Glenn Strange had become, which is odd because, like, these three movies, like Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, he's in that quite a bit. Like, he's quite good in that movie, and thankfully he gets quite a lot to do there. But these first two movies, like, there's not a lot. But you're right, like, he had played it so often in other bits and pieces that he really made, like, a, you know, it was a hustle. It was like what the kids now would call, like, you know, a side hustle.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because, like, obviously Boris Karloff's version in the original is, like, yes, very iconic and distinct, but Strange's version is kind of more the look that I think of, I say, like you had it in the notes, is, like, more like the TV kind of look that they would use in, like, the 50s and 60s. And, like, that is kind of the more of the Frankenstein look that I think of when I think of, like, the look, especially, like, if they're translating into, like, something animated or something of, you know, this way, or, like, you know, even whenever it's not named the monster, but they're obviously drawing the iconography of the monster, it's usually this one that I come to mind. I'll say the flat top in this one looks a little bit awkward, but I did like how, with this introduction, his physicality is distinctly very different than Karloff's, and, like, kind of he doesn't walk, like, as symmetrical as he does. He's kind of, like, a little bit more loosely rigid, and, like, kind of very much you know, and even the facial expressions that he's given in this one are quite different than the ones that Karloff would give. So, like, even in the small amount of time, he did, like, make enough, like, tiny nuances to where I could, like, distinctly tell the difference between the two versions.
Yeah.
So I kind of made a note here, and I wanted to pose it to both of you. Like, to me, I feel like Glenn Strange is the Kane Hodder of the Frankenstein series, in that, like, he's really well known for playing the role. He's not necessarily the best Frankenstein, and he doesn't appear in the best Frankenstein movies, but he's really well known and he's beloved for it, but he never got a chance to play one in a great Frankenstein movie. Does that feel like an apt comparison, or am I stretching here?
No, I think that's pretty apt. I think that's good.
I think that's pretty spot on, honestly. Yeah, because, like, I do always find it interesting how Hodder is, like, you know, kind of heralded as, you know, the best performer, but I'm like, he's in all the movies that nobody likes. You know, poor guy.
Yeah.
Because when I watch Friday the 13th, I think of, like, Ted White in Part 4 is like the best Jason.
Yeah.
And Kane Hodder is very good, but you're right, like, he's in the worst 4 Friday movies. Except for Jason Goes to Hell, which is I will defend.
Oh, yeah, I mean, sure. And if we want to make more comparisons, I guess I would call Boris Karloff the Robert Englund of the Frankenstein series, because he embodies that character so much that when other people do it, it's just not the same.
All right.
And I gotta say, I think it does help that his name was Glenn Strange. To be a horror icon and have that name, I think is pretty nice. And I remember when my dad told me that the actor's name was Glenn Strange when I was a little kid, I just thought that was hilarious. It's like, wow, that's amazing. And I just loved that so much. For a while,
if he was like, Glenn Normal, you'd be out.
I'd be out. Yeah.
Couple quick notes and a couple more performers. J. Carrol Naish, who gives our turn, is poor lovelorn Daniel the Hunchback. I just kind of going through his filmography. He makes a career out of, like, playing really problematic roles. And I'm not saying it's him personally. I'm saying at the time, like, you kind of take what's given.
Sure.
He plays a murderous hunchback here. So, number one, he's playing a person with a disability in a way that, you know, is not very favorable to them.
Right.
Okay. So that's strike one. In 1958-59, he takes on the lead role of Charlie Chan for 39 episodes in a revival of the TV show. As far as I know, there's not a hint of anything Asian about J. Carrol Naish. I don't even know if he liked to go for Chinese food, you know, let alone had a hint of any Asian ancestry in him. And he's playing Charlie Chan. So, yellow face.
Insane.
Strike two.
Yeah.
Okay. we're going to go back a little further to 1950. In Annie Get Your Gun, he plays Chief Sitting Bull. I'm not even going to say anything else because I'll just get in trouble. I'm just leaving it at that. He plays Chief Sitting Bull in Annie Get Your Gun.
I mean, it's like once or twice, you can explain it away with the times, but then when you get this many racked up in your resume, I don't know. It seems like you're doing it on purpose.
Well, I mean, but then you have people like Karloff and Lee who also played, Dr. Fu Manchu and,
And this is just what it was at the time.
You were just assigned to roles and you didn't have a lot of say in it necessarily. Yeah.
So he does play an uncle in one episode guest spot on the show, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. I couldn't confirm if he was actually an uncle. I'll let that one slide. His last on-screen role was in the movie Dracula versus Frankenstein in 1971, where he played Dr. Durea, which is an alias for Dr. Frankenstein. And Lon Chaney Jr. actually plays his assistant in that role, which is kind of a nice little switch. I don't know if, Brian, you're laughing.
I haven't seen it yet, but it's
awful.
It's on my list. I'm doing my next article for the Frankenstein series is going to be what I dub the weirdos. They're the movies that they're not quite parodies. They sort of fit into that time period between 1931 and 1970-ish but they're not Universal or Hammer movies. And this one's on the list to watch, and I'm afraid.
This movie is, how you just said, this is a movie that you can watch and say, I have watched something that is technically called a movie.
Yeah.
This is on that list.
Yeah. I also have Jesse James Meets Frankenstein's Daughter on that list. Boy. So it's going to be an interesting, couple months here.
Do you mind if I spoil it? Or
Go for it.
So I watched this as a young kid on like a Creature double feature on a Saturday, and even as like an 8-year-old kid, I'm like, this is garbage. Frankenstein's monster looks like a Garbage Pail Kid stretched out to 8 feet.
Yeah, I've seen the picture.
The climactic fight is like Dracula and Frankenstein fighting outside, and Dracula literally rips the limbs off of Frankenstein one at a time, and he rips his head off at the end. And he does it at like 6 a.m, so then the sun comes up and Dracula dies.
Oh my gosh.
It is really something. So enjoy that.
Yeah, there's a lot on that list that I'm like, dreading. I was a teenage Frankenstein and Lady Frankenstein. Yeah, there's a lot. Frankenstein Conquers the World, the kaiju movie, could be interesting to see what's I've got cooking up for that next one. Coming. Yeah. So anyway.
Okay. I'll briefly mention, I don't have a ton on Elena Verdugo, who plays our poor doomed Romani Danza Ilonka. She has a career in Hollywood and a number of like B pictures in the 40s and 50s. She'll appear again with Chaney Jr. and his Wolfman co-star Evelyn Ankers the next year in The Frozen Ghost. His horror starts to go out of fashion in the latter part of the 40s. She'll transition into westerns like El Dorado Pass and The Big Sombrero, and then in noir such as like she'll Shed No Tears. She really finds a niche as a player in television in the 1950s. She has like a number of one-off appearances in television shows in its infancy before she really lands like one of the first leading performances in a comedy called Meet Millie in 1952. It ran for 106 episodes, and she's the star of the show. So she's one of the first real leading ladies of television. And then after that, when it ends in 1956, she just starts doing guest spots for numerous shows for years and years. She's always working. And in what would be like really the third act of her career, she lands like probably the most plum role of her career. Like she gets Emmy nominated turns in this role. She plays Consuelo Lopez on the show Marcus Welby, MD. She is like the top labeled woman on the show. It runs for 169 episodes between 1969 and 1976. Way before my time, so it's not something that you see, but, you know, just one of those persons that you see here, you're like, oh, I kind of like her, I like this performance, I wonder what else she's done, and then you see this, like, really varied career. Nothing that is of major interest to horror fans, but
I mean,
you know,
you can tell though. I mean, it's like I felt like in this movie, is like as soon as she's on screen, she was one of those people. I was like, oh, she's got the sauce. Like she's got that thing, you know. So you can tell that, you know, she was gonna kind of go on to have a filmography like this. You know, obviously pairing her up with Talbot in this, and in general, these movies can get a little bit, you know, mopey at times, a little bit, you know, kind of dramatic in that way, and she, you know, brings some nice little spice to the brings a little bit more of that fun energy for the film.
Yeah. I really like her here. I love the character of Ilonka. I think it's really the first woman in a few movies that's actually had something to do, I think. And I think there's like a little bit of like a melodrama in the relationship with her and Talbot. It gives Talbot something to do besides mope for some of the movie. And I love Mia Raven-haired beauty. So
I think they pop off the screen in black and white better. I mean, I prefer dark-haired women myself as well, but like I think they even just like look better than blondes in black and white films. And I mean, she has this great curvaceous curls and stuff. I love it. Like she looks fantastic.
Yeah. So the movie's out December of 44. It's a hit. People love it. It does pretty well at the theater. It does okay with critics as well. I've got a couple reviews I pulled up. I'll read a couple of these to y'all, then we'll move on to our discussion. So from the Hollywood Citizen News, a thriller deluxe, a film guaranteed to provide a cute case of the jitters. From the New York Times critic, A.H. Weiler. It's like a baseball team with 9 Babe Ruths. But this grisly Congress doesn't hit hard. It merely has speed and a change of pace.
What are people like? I mean, what movie are they watching? Like that analogy is like not even close to anything in this film.
I know.
That's so funny.
Far less critical back then,
so
right?
Funny.
We were. It is bound to garner as many chuckles as it does chills, which I think I can accurate.
Buy that one. Yeah.
From the New York Daily Mirror, there is enough gore to satisfy even the most avid reveler in vicarious bloodshed. Which I'm like,
is there any gore in this? I was about to say, I don't think there's
of blood.
Not a single drop.
You see a couple brains in a jar. That's about it.
Yeah, I think you do spot a little bit of blood on Ilonka when she crawls over to Larry Talbot.
Yeah.
But that is a stretch. Like, I am really stretching. Like, I am doing my most fervent yoga pose to get to that. We're doing some downward dog to get there. All right, so that is the background. And again, I am stunned we got that much background out of it.
Well, it's like it's a new phase, you know. Again, like because now we are in the intertwining, phase of these films, and so got to introduce all the other players.
Good. So where should we start? I think like all of us agree that like and I could be wrong, but this is Boris Karloff's movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really like Dr. Neymar. I think he is.
What do you love about him?
I think he's very different from like classic Dr. Frankenstein, and like in that he's usually kind of struggling with his morals a little bit more, and like kind of things like that. He kind of sways back and forth between like his devotion to his science, but then like also trying to appeal to the perception of people. Neymar, he's not quibbling with any ethical qualms. He's swapping brains left and right. having Daniel kill people. He he gives me like shades of like Sweeney Todd meets Herbert West, in a way. Like, he kind of has the arrogance of West, but then also like his hell-bent revenge angle gives me like some Sweeney Todd vibes. So like I like that this is like the first half of this is a solid like revenge thriller where he's like, all right, I got my things. Like, yes, I need to go find the work of Frankenstein, but on the way there, I need to take care of some business, and so I kind of like the whole angle and taking the carnival like little trailer, because it's like, oh, like perfect cover up, nobody will suspect the things that we're doing in here, because under the guise of like this cabinet of horrors or whatever. So yeah, I think he's a very interesting character. I really like the energy and like performance he's bringing with this one. He has some very like stiff eyes, and just like some of the looks that he's given people, and his slimy manipulation too, of like like him treating Daniel like, because at certain points you're like, oh, he does kind of care for Daniel in a way, and they are like equal partners, but then it's like, no, it is all a veneer, for him manipulating Daniel throughout. And then you fucking feel like really bad for Daniel I don't always feel bad for the assistant characters, but in this one I was like, I had some sympathies for Daniel, even though he's a cold-blooded murderer, but I still felt some things for him because of the way his relationship was with Neymar.
Do you think Neymar is who people think of when they actually think of like a Dr. Frankenstein type character?
Yes.
Like the cold-blooded mad scientist?
I had that exact thought whenever I was watching this. I was like, this is more my idea of like, yeah, the classic like mad scientist. Like, again, I'm going to bring it up as I did in the first one. In Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein, their version of the Doctor is a lot more closer to Neymar than Dr. Frankenstein, like way closer.
This is making me think more of, I think he's got more in common with Peter Cushing than Colin Clive.
Oh, yeah.
And also it's sort of a throwback to things like from the Expressionist period, Rotwang from Metropolis and Caligari, things like that. There's just like the mad scientist, kind of crazy hair looking, that sort of thing, and Karloff, chewing the scenery doesn't hurt it. I think it just feeds into sort of the fun of it all. So I think this feels more like a precursor to Cushing, and characters of that nature. So.
What do you think it was for Karloff to get a chance to play kind of the other side of the coin after doing like 3 movies under the heavy makeup and having the monster and not really getting to speak? And now he gets to play like the other side of it, where now you're the genius man of science, but you're a bit mad.
He played a few roles like this in the Columbia years, though those are usually good-natured kinds of guys. They're more like Colin Clive's character, where you have they're idealizing science, and they're not like narcissists. And I think for him to just go for it and be the baddie, completely unsympathetic. I think it's just fun to play a total villain, and I think he's reveling in how fun that is. In a way, he's maybe preparing, a less well-written version of Cabman Gray from the Body Snatcher. It's a purely evil individual. And
when you
just
think
relishes in the misery of others for his own ends.
And when you think about it too, like he is very prepared, because like even though he's previously been playing the monster, he's been in these movies and he understands the character of the mad scientist, so he's able to add in different nuances to this performance, because he understands how to make it slightly different. Like he's like, oh, I want to, like, this is my chance to explore the Doctor character, and I want to go into this this more maniacal, darker side, where it's like at first it's like he, you know, comes off as like, oh, he's kind of a Frankenstein fanboy, but then it's like as the film goes on, it's like, oh no, like he, like, you know, very much like has, you know, his more priorities, and then there's an evolution of him, like, of wanting to find, you know, Frankenstein's work and everything, but at the same time he also revels in the times where he gets to be like, oh, I'm actually, like, Frankenstein was wrong about this, and I actually know this. So it's like he has these, you know, he's always searching for these opportunities to, like, kind of one up this, you know, other person who doesn't even have like a connection to it, but like he's feels so strongly about it that at one point he's like, yes, I admire and, you know, follow you, but then it's like, oh no, but I can be better than Frankenstein. I think that's a very interesting angle for Neymar.
Oh, I think, too, what I like is you get some very interesting visual shorthand right away in the art direction when we're introduced to him. In that, when you see his cell, it is every square inch of it is covered with that chalk, where he has all of his equations. And as an audience member, you look at that and you immediately realize something is not right with this person. And then you have that larger kind of mural or that kind of chalkboard where it's like, what is his main experiment? What landed him in prison? I want to put the brain of a human in a dog. And you realize how horrific an idea that is. Like, and also, like, we love dogs, like, more than people. Like, you don't hurt, like, John Wick taught us that. You don't harm dogs. So you, without Karloff even having to say a word, you know this is a bad person, and he is evil.
And I wonder if, you know, that's another shout out for like Poor Things, is like, you know, that's
Right.
like with Godwin's character, him like switching brains with animals and things like that. And that's such a part of that film. So it's like, again, like, you know, even though that film has like, you know, inspirations of Frankenstein, I see a lot of Neymar in that character as well. And yeah, that he is, and he's so calm about it too. And like, I really love the introduction too, like of him like snatching up the guard for his chalk, and I was like, oh shit, like this guy is not playing games. So I really liked him kind of having this like snappiness to him.
And what does the guard call him in that moment after he gets snatched and dropped? Brian, I think you
Calls
noted
him
that.
a would-be Frankenstein.
I love that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's a great moment.
And do you think when that line is written, our writer like kicks back a little bit, puts his feet up, pours himself a shot, and is like, or is that like he knows, a little wink and a nod, or is that like, nope, it's a Frankenstein movie, I have to throw that in there?
Well, I think, you know, you have the text and you have the meta text, you know, so I think they're playing with both there, to have Karloff in that role and the name of the monster being equated to the name of the doctor and all kinds of things over the years. So I think you're having a good time with that, with yourself there. Yeah.
Yeah. Structurally, this movie is a bit odd.
Yes.
In that it feels a bit like it, almost like an anthology, in that
Or like it tries to be.
it tries to be.
Yeah.
In that, unlike Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, which Stephen, Brian, and I, when we discussed it last week, we had a bit of a debate about whether or not the title was accurate, because like the fight is so short at the end, although it's not Frankenstein versus the Wolfman. It's they meet, which they do. They meet, and they kind of become buddies.
Yeah.
Here, none of our monsters really meet. Like the Wolfman in Frankenstein, they don't have really any interaction with one another at all in this movie, which is a bit of a shame given the chemistry between the two characters in the previous outing. And Dracula does not have any interaction at all with either the Wolfman or the monster. It's really not until Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein that all three of them are going to like interact quite frequently in any of these movies for reasons that don't make any sense or are ever explained or that we ever really care about because the movie's just so much damn fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting structurally when you're having these films, because it's like, yes, how do we, obviously like have the story and make it feel natural to weave these characters in and out. And again, like, I'm a big fan of Stephen Sommers' Van Helsing from 2004, Penny Dreadful.
You've mentioned that before.
I did, because it's a fantastic movie. People need to watch it.
You're comfortable mentioning that in a public setting.
Oh, 100%.
Good for you.
Rewatch it. If you haven't watched it in a good while, it holds up better than you think. But but I like the structure of like the way that one weaves the different characters kind of in and out, and so does Penny Dreadful does an interesting version of doing that as well. Of and these guys, they also had the luxury of knowing that there's a pretty legitimate shot, we're gonna keep getting to do stuff, so it's like it's kind of interesting that Dracula's introduced, he gets his thing to do, and then just like kind of quietly backs out of the movie, and then like, we'll save him for the next movie, you'll get some more of him later, so it's like he served his purpose, and then then we kind of focus the rest on, like, I was surprised, I was genuinely surprised how much Wolf Man was in this movie. Like, I wasn't expecting him to kind of have as big of a role as he did. But I like, Neymar using Dracula as an attack dog, essentially, to be like, all right, I'm gonna wake you up, I'm gonna make you a deal, I'll make your coffin bed if you kill these people for me. And Dracula goes, yes, bet, I would love nothing more. It's just like a funny way to use the character again, and kind of a awkward introduction, but then the way that he serves a purpose versus the way that Talbot, because he knows where the work is, and all these things, and like he kind of has his own role to play. So I think it's a little bit like segmented, could have been weaved a bit smoother, because I see what you're talking about with like the pseudo anthology kind of aspect to it, but could have been smoother. But at the same time, it's like each character at least did have a specific purpose. It wasn't just, hey, let's throw all these characters together on screen and throw them all in the movie together. Like, they did each have like something to do for the story, and still without taking away from Neymar still kind of being the star of the show.
What I feels on this watch, I didn't really think about it before this watch, but this time through, it feels like the Neymar thing is being set up as a frame story. It's like, okay, we're going to take revenge on these three guys. So we've got our monsters, we've got Dracula, we've got the Wolf Man, we have Frankenstein's monster. So they do the Dracula story. They wrote the Dracula story, they filmed the Dracula story, and then they said, okay, forget it. We're just going to have it all happen at the same time from then on out. Like, it was originally going to be an anthology where, like, the Wolfman took up the second part of the movie or something like that, and had his own sort of self-contained story within there. And then they have a story with, with it ending with the Frankenstein monster killing the third guy. That's kind of how, because that Dracula story is so separate from the rest of the movie that it just feels like it's its own anthological story, and so that's, I guess, how I felt while I was watching it. But and then they just decided not to do the anthology for the other 2/3 of the movie, but I don't know.
I would love if, like, a year from now they uncover like an hour of footage, or really 40 minutes of footage, because these movies are like 70 minutes long, and it's all John Carradine's Dracula, and they realize it was so terrible they cut it, and then they had to make this. Like, originally House of Frankenstein was just a Carradine Dracula movie, but it was so awful they cut most of it.
You're really hard on Mr.
I really
Carradine,
am not
yeah.
a big fan
No,
of his.
it's okay.
No, but it really hit me on this watch is what this is it's not a Dracula movie, it's not a Frankenstein movie, and even like for a Kurt Siodmak story, if Kurt Siodmak is coming up with a story, Larry Talbot's going to be in it, and he's going to take a big part. Like, that's his dog right there. Like, literally, he's the Wolfman guy. It's really a Dr. Neiman movie.
Absolutely.
From start to finish, to the degree that you almost wonder if they're setting Karloff up to appear in more of these, like as a traveling mad scientist, and you could see 2, 3, 4 more of these movies down the road.
Yeah.
And it's his quest for revenge against the men that have imprisoned him, and that's why it feels so episodic. Like, he goes to the first part, he gets his revenge, he goes to the second and gets it against the other 2 guys, and that's why it feels so convoluted.
Yeah, and I think that's why, because it's a Neymar movie, that when it goes to the Dracula story and he's not there, it just feels so awkward to me. It just feels out of. I don't know how. I don't think I'm very expressing this very well. It's sort of like,
you are,
and then because then they like decide to just kill off the second 2 guys just like that. I mean, there's nothing. There's really nothing
they're
about
like
it.
afterthoughts.
Yeah,
they're afterthoughts.
Yeah, it's like they changed their mind halfway through the movie of what they were going to do. So
it's weirder next week when the movie is called House of Dracula, and Dracula is killed off at about the same point in the movie.
Okay. Yeah.
And it becomes a completely different, but it's also like a super fun Jekyll and Hyde movie after that.
Sure.
Like, it is like when Dracula is killed off, because that was the first time I had watched it, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is called House of Dracula, and he dead. And then it becomes a Jekyll and Hyde movie, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Like, I'm really enjoying this now. It's quite fun. And your hunchback is actually like your Ilanka and Daniel character combined, and it's quite awesome. I really enjoy that movie quite a bit, so I'm looking forward to talking about that one. One thing I appreciate about the Universal Monsters world is that it's a world without doubt, and that like Neiman, like when he's riding, and when he and Daniel are riding with Lampini after their escape. And by the way, Kenton's direction in this movie, like, we kind of came down harsh on him for Ghost of Frankenstein, because that movie does look really flat. There's like not a lot of great angles to it. The lighting is pretty bland. Everything just feels kind of like, especially coming off of the first 3 movies. Here, there's like a lot more shadow. The storms look great. The sets look much better. So I'm not saying Kenton is like greatly improved, but he does shoot some good action sequences, I would say. Like the Dracula sequence is pretty thrilling when he's kind of trying to get away in the horse and buggy. Although Dracula having to get away in a horse and buggy as an idea is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
I thought this was I thought it was pretty solidly made. Like this movie feels a little more loose. I think while the action scenes I think are decent, but I think we've seen kind of better. But I think the way that he even just films conversations, like there's kind of a light bounciness to the way that he shoots them, and they don't feel as like sometimes some of these films can feel a bit stagey. And I don't feel that at all with this one. This feels like very much like a realistic, like kind of more film in that kind of way. So I really like the way that he does dialogue, especially between like Daniel and Ilanka, or Ilanka and Talbot.
Yeah.
Visually, it feels more of a piece with the rest of the franchise than Ghost of Frankenstein does. It feels like it fits in with Frankenstein Meets the Wolf Man and even the first 3. It just has a similar carryover in the look, and I think that is it's surprising that it's the same director, I guess, as Ghost, and to have it look. But you also have a more, I think, probably forceful producers saying, okay, this is the look of the movie. So there's a lot of things that go into those sorts of choices too. So
well, one thing I like is that in this world, the monsters are just accepted. That, like, Frankenstein's monster is just accepted as a thing that's happened. It's part of the town's history. It's part of the folklore. There's no doubt, like, these are actual, like, historical events of record. People believe it. People believe that, like, werewolves are a thing, and there's no one... You don't have that segment of the film where you're saying, like, no, that's ridiculous. This can't be a werewolf. It's just accepted that, like...
And
werewolves are...
And I love that they're over it too. That was the really funny part whenever they're like, no, we're not, we didn't approve your warrant or your thingy, so you got to go.
You don't have a permit.
Your permit, yeah. And he's like, so you're gonna have to go. And he's like, why? There's nothing wrong with it. And they're just like, we're done with horrors. We are tired of it. We don't want. And starts telling about what happened. But yeah, I love that they that horrors are just a thing in this world. Like it's just we're pretty chill with it all.
It's like Haddonfield in Halloween 6, Curse of Michael Myers, where they're like, yeah, we're not celebrating. We're going to do what we should have done after Halloween 1 and 2. Like, we're just going to cancel Halloween going forward every year. Like, we're just not going to celebrate this stupid holiday anymore.
And Crystal Lake changing its name to Forest Green in part 6.
There you go. Yeah.
And I wish more films, we kind of got away from that in like the 80s and 90s, because I always give like Japanese horror films a good amount of credit too, because like they just accept that like supernatural things are just things, so then you can focus the story on more other stuff rather than spending a chunk of the film of being like, I don't believe you, or no, you didn't see that, you're crazy. Like we don't got time for that. Like they're just in the world, and let's move on now,
because that just adds like 20 to 30 minutes to a movie that is already too long. Then you're getting to like an hour and 53 to 2 hour and 12 minute run times in what should be like 85 to 90 minutes of a movie. And it's like 20 minutes of disbelief, basically. And it's like, oh, I don't need this. Like even like Neiman's character, like Neiman and Daniel, when they're riding with the Great Lampini, like they don't doubt that Count Dracula exists. Like they exist. Count Dracula the vampire is a historical figure of record. What they doubt is that some carny rube like Lampini is the guy that would have the bones. And that's what I love. And what makes it great is like after they dispatch of Lampini and they take over his role, and they're like, are you the Lampini I ran out of town 3 years ago? That was my brother. Which is just Karloff having a meal. Yeah. When Karloff pulls out the steak and out of a fit of like just anger and takes 2 steps away and then pauses, not because he's like, oh, what if? And it's a great little moment. I really, really love that about this movie. It's just fun. It's just a fun little gimmick.
I mean, there's a lot of gimmicks in this movie. Even how they escape from the prison in the beginning. There's just like this freak earthquake. It's like, oh, hey, let's tunnel out through the floor.
The roof just fell out of nowhere.
Yeah. So
these are poorly designed prisons. These are, if like a bad rainstorm will cause, like, this is not Shawshank. Like imagine, Andy is getting out of Shawshank in like 2 weeks. If he was put in Valseria, let's just put it that way.
And even the way that they like when they take the whenever they are in the carriage with him, and then whenever they reveal themselves, I just like love like how quickly like he like because that was Neymar, like he had to put on a normal person mask for a second to like be like, hey, can we get a ride? But then after that he's like, nope, let me go ahead and take that off, and he instantly switches into, and then just like the way he just like points to Daniel, take care of him, and then just like this smoothness and way he's just like, and now the driver. I was just like, oh, okay, yes, like Karloff is cooking.
Yep.
Yeah, and I feel like Daniel is more of Neymar's puppet than than a cold-blooded killer per se. I mean, he's sort of under his thumb, and he's promised to heal me, so I'm going to do whatever he says. So I feel like he sort of takes on the role of the Frankenstein monster in some ways, because he's at least in like Son of Frankenstein, and to some extent in Bride, where he's just sort of like the blunt instrument. He's the one who takes care of all the dirty work for Pretorius or for Igor. But because he's going to, get something out of it. But he himself is kind of at times at least, there's some empathy that can be directed toward him. So
I mean, it's more of a means to an end for him, but you know, he's like, you know, but he does like optimistically believe that, you know, like, yes, he's gonna do what he says he's gonna do. And so I find him fascinating in that way, but yet he still ends up, you know, following the tropes of the past assistants of, you know, like, you know, by the end of the movie, he's getting jealous of the monster's body because Neymar is working on him and not, you know, fixing him. And we got, you know, the classic him whipping him because we just got to have, you know, every assistant has to whip the monster at some point. That's just an unspoken rule, apparently. But it's him like kind of falling into like the same you know, kind of trappings and feelings that, you know, the previous ones have had, but at the same time, his is, you know, he's not the like kind of he's not like the worshiping assistant, you know, like some of the other assistants are, where there's like, oh my god, like I'm obsessed with the doctor, blah blah blah, and it's like, no, Daniel wants to do his own thing. He wants to go take walks. He wants to talk to girls. You know, he wants to do his own stuff, but then he's just like, oh well, you know, because I still haven't got my body fixed, I still got to do what Dr. Neymar says. So I find him fascinating in that way. And with like some of the like really wonderful like essays I've seen of people like with kind of trans allegories and poor things, I could see kind of similar with Daniel of kind of having a body dysmorphia kind of angle to him, that like he's still comfortable with himself, but he still wants, you know, this you know quote unquote beautiful perfect body for the perception of others, you know, and it only takes just one person seeing past that and him like being like, oh, she doesn't really care, like, you know. And he like kind of starts, you know, feeling better until he gets jealous of Larry. So like, I think Daniel is one of the more interesting assistant characters for me.
Could you talk a little more about that dysmorphia angle? Like, would you feel comfortable digging into that, or was that just like a...
Oh, I mean, it's not something that I can exactly speak on, but in some of like I said, some of the readings that I've kind of seen from you know, these discussions of Poor Things, like kind of had a lot more of, you know, you know, just he like it. I even think that the word choicing of him saying beautiful body is like very specific, because it's, you know, not, again, it's not coming from him, but it's other people's perception, you know, of him, and it's other people's perception is what is what shapes his kind of perception of his body, but at the same time, it's still something he wants just for himself as well. So I find it fascinating, but yeah, there's definitely smart people that could and that come from that background that could probably speak out a little bit better than me.
Well, what is the last insult that Ilonka hurls at Daniel when she's angry at him at the end? Like when Daniel reveals to Ilonka, like, look, like Larry isn't who you think he is. Like Larry is a werewolf. And he doesn't reveal this information for completely altruistic reasons. Like part of it is jealousy. I don't think he does it purely out of jealousy. I think part of it is also like he's going to be unsafe to be around if you're with him. And she reacts in such a way because like she believes him. She does a thing where like, I don't believe you, but I actually do, because that's why I'm going to react so over the top. The last thing she says to him is like, you're ugly. Like that's the last insult she hurls at him, because she knows like that is going to be the one that is going to cut him the deepest, because that is the one that he is so entrenched in his psyche that he's going to believe that one the most. You know, you're mean and you're cruel and you're ugly. And that is the one that's going to sting him the most.
And the fact that he cares much more about, again, like you said, like that, you know, that cuts him more than being like, oh, like, no, you're an ugly person because you're a murderer, you know, not because of, you know, your physical appearance. Yeah. But even still, that's going to hurt him more than like the idea of like, because he has no qualms that he's a murderer. He says it out loud. He's just like, oh, yeah, you know, I've done these things. But yeah, kind of says,
and
yeah.
We've seen hints of this throughout the series. We've seen hints of it in Bride of Frankenstein when the monster peers into the lake and he sees his reflection and starts like gesturing at the water, trying to get the reflection to go away. You've seen it in Son of Frankenstein when the monster sees his reflection in the mirror and then pulls Wolf to the mirror and compares the two of them, their like physical appearances with one another, and he makes that gesture the monster often makes when he's confused or pleading, like, why am I like this? Like he's repulsed by his own figure, and it's Igor who understands what the monster is experiencing, because Igor is also not deformed. He has the hunchback and the broken neck, and Igor is the one who knows what the monster needs, so he turns the mirror away from the monster so he doesn't have to see that. So we see that dysmorphia throughout the series, and it's something that we could like really dig into here. And I'm making a note. It's times like the only time I ever miss doing psychoanalysis, a horror therapy podcast, is when stuff like this comes up. Otherwise, we have a lot on our plates, and I do miss talking with Jen and Laura every week. But otherwise, we're very busy people. So, what else? I mean, let's stay on this track though with Daniel and Larry and Ilonka, because I think they are kind of the heart of this movie. Again, we mentioned like emo Larry Talbot, like this is his third turn as the Wolfman. Is it a little bit much at this point? Like, is Larry's act wearing a little bit thin?
He is.
Like, I just want to die.
He has got his hair bangs in front of one eye for this entire movie because he is just moping and sobbing. But I mean, I guess I understand to one degree, because it's like he kind of got what he wanted and he's being frozen, so he's not having to deal with it. So he was just like, you woke me up. Like, if you're going to do that, you might as well kill me. But then this is having him that's kind of another just like fun aspect of these monster mashup movies, because you can be like, yeah, let's have a love triangle between the hunchback assistant, the Wolfman, and a beautiful Romani woman. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that because we can, so it's like it also I think helps in that way. I mean, do I think I don't think Lon Chaney Jr. is like phoning it in or bad or anything, because he does still have some really great scenes with Ilonka. But at the same time, yeah, he is the biggest baby in this one. Just woe is me. And you don't even know if obviously Nemar says he could cure him, but like we don't even know if that's how it works. Whenever he starts explaining putting certain brains in certain bodies, it's like, is lycanthropism, is that a mind thing or is that more of a body thing? So it's like, I don't know. But his inclusion was again, I just didn't expect him to have like as large of a role as he did in the back half of this.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that the screenwriter also did the screenplay for Hunchback of Notre Dame, because the whole Daniel Ilonka thing is pretty much Quasimodo and Esmeralda. I mean, he's enticed by her dancing. I mean, there's all sorts of things. And then another,
can you blame him?
Right, of course. And then another man comes into the picture. This beautiful woman who, gives him attention and sees him as a, I guess, beautiful soul. Sees past his outer appearance, whatever you want to say. There's lots of similarities between the two there. And it's interesting because I never, if you watch the Hunchback of Notre Dame movies, I don't think of those as horror movies at all. And they always seem to get lumped in with it. And I think it's maybe likely because of a movie like this, where on the poster, the quote-unquote hunchback is listed as one of the monsters of the Monster Mash in both House of Dracula and House of Frankenstein. Yeah, I think it's the makeup.
Is it possible the makeup of the Hunchback of Notre Dame?
Yeah, especially I think in the Lon Chaney version from 23. Though Charles Laughton's, he's got it's pretty much as Victor Hugo described it, I believe, though.
Okay.
I haven't read that book in a long time, but it's not really a monster story. I mean, that's not what the movies really reflect. It's not really what the book reflects either. So it's just sort of was like Universal was like saying, "Hey, we have this property that we used, 20 years ago. Let's add it to the list of something we can put in here."
Right.
And they used the trope in various ways, of course, in Frankenstein.
Let's be honest, there is something a bit barbaric and grotesque about just taking a physical deformity and being like a monster.
Exactly.
So I do want to be clear about that.
Absolutely.
Like, that is...
And that is the way that character starts in this movie. I mean, it's that
you get the feeling that life has been very hard for Daniel. Right? I mean, you see him, we are introduced to him in prison. We have no context of like why he's there. He says to Dr. Frankenstein, like, I've killed 4 men for you. So we've only seen him kill 4 people on screen. So we don't, as far as we know, he was not a murderer before he's gone on this path with Dr. Neiman for like this plot. So you could see him being tossed in this prison cell for no other reason than either his association with Neiman or just the fact that he has a physical disability.
Right.
And the persons don't like it. So therefore, we're going to shutter you away, which, as we know, there's a long history of incarcerating persons with physical and mental disabilities. We're going to shutter them away and give them not the care they deserve. And need, and we're going to like take away their rights and their dignity.
And that's frankly part of what Hugo was speaking out against in Hunchback of Notre Dame, for example. Anyway,
so, but what we see, I think, with Ilonka here, there's something very childlike about her. She is cruel to Daniel in her final moments, but she's very much a victim too. Like we see the treatment of her by her other Romani brethrens. There is like when the man who runs the encampment suggests to the officers like, oh, she'll dance for you as well. That in 2024 terms definitely carries a hint of some trafficking that is going on there. Like, what will that dance entail? There is definitely maybe a more insidious like suggestion that might be going on there as well. She's very much under the thumb, and there's physical abuse that we just see it on screen. He beats her with the belt until Daniel comes to her rescue. So there's something very childlike about this woman as well. She meets Talbot, and she brings out something in him that has not been there since his transformation in the Wolf Man, and that is like an element of maybe hope. And it's not the most well-developed romance in cinematic history, but it's something that hasn't been present for like 2 movies now either.
I like that her character too isn't like Ilonka's like not a like hostage or anything in this. Like she's with them because she wants to be. She's like, I'm getting rides. I got people to talk to, and it's like it's almost endearing when it's like she kind of inserts herself and like kind of bands together this like little crew of misfits, like almost, if you squint your eyes, a found family, but not really. But at the same time, like she is like kind of like you said, bringing things out of Talbot, like trying to give him like kind of motivation to live again, because at this point he is just over it. So it's like in that way that she like kind of is there to bring people together as well, like rather than just her being like, oh yeah, we took her from these people and now you're with us because we're forcing you to stay. It's like I like that it's they use her to be the to be the moral center.
As far as Talbot goes, I don't know how much of this is like a purposeful development of his character, but each subsequent appearance of his in human form, he gets more violent when he doesn't get his way. He gets more desperate to get cured of his lycanthropy, and as he gets more desperate, he gets more he gets more angry. As he gets more angry, he gets more likely to put his hands on other people. You see it here with Neiman at the end, where he's ready to murder Neiman, when Neiman says, like, I just can't operate on you right now, this instance. As you can see, I am doing other things. And you see a progression in the next movie, and especially in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, he's ready to beat the shit out of Bud Abbott for just having a monster mask. Like, each subsequent movie, Lawrence Talbot becomes increasingly unhinged in human form. And I don't know how much of that is a purposeful development of character. I don't know how much of that is just Lon Chaney on set, taking liberties. I don't know how much of that is happy accident. But you can watch all 5 of his appearances, and you can see that progression.
I mean, if it is supposed to be like a character progression, I think it's interesting because, like, you know, he... spends so much time, like, you know, not accepting it, like, hey, that, like, you know, when you're, you know, the wolf, you know, man part of you inside of you, it's something that's out of your control. It sucks, but it's also, like, doesn't make you personally a bad person. It's just like, you know, it's just something you kind of, well, I mean, just something you has to.
I would say putting your hands on people
I'm
and
saying,
threatening to murder them makes you.
I'm saying in wolf form,
in human.
No,
form.
I'm saying in wolf
but
form,
in man form,
he can't control. Like, that's the lesson he should be learning, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
But in human form, it's like, no, like, that's the part of you that makes you a monster, is when you want to strangle somebody in human form. Yes, that is what, like, not the actual, you know, kind of monster part of him. So if that is intentional, I think it's very fascinating.
My take would be, I doubt that the screenwriters and filmmakers were that intentional, but it is an interesting progression of the character. So yeah, it's well spotted for sure.
I would say you're probably right, but I do see it. I would say one thing I noticed here is during the second transformation scene in particular, and I think with the advances they're able to make, what you notice is, like, there's more, like, facial movement, and along with that you see some recognition and some real fear and anger. Like, before, like, the face would be perfectly static, and it was still very cool looking to see, like, the hair appear and then that transition.
Sure.
Here you can see the judder and the eyes, like the mouth judder and the eyes move a bit.
Right.
And along with that, some real kind of recognition of what's happening to him in that moment, some rage that it's occurring, and some real fear about what's going to happen as well. Yeah. And I really like that. It is sadly like...
Yeah, it's sort of a sense of continuity, and the lap dissolves, just saying, hey, you know, do this while we're... Yeah.
Yeah. So, for a movie called House of Frankenstein, there is a remarkably little of Frankenstein monster, right? Like, Devaughn, I know you have some thoughts on this, right?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of forgot about him. I mean, and not in a bad way, because I was enjoying what we were doing with these characters, with Neiman and Daniel and the Wolf Man, and so I, like, wasn't missing the monster per se. But at the same time, I just, like, I was like, wait, how much more of this movie is there? And I was like, and he's still on the slab sleeping. Like, he's still not even been revived yet at this point. So I was just kind of like, alrighty. But, you know, but for me personally, even though, yes, it is in the title, I wasn't like, you know, like missing him in a bad way. Because again, like, you know, I've kind of accepted now just Frankenstein is the name, and everything, you know, all the characters underneath have their part to play. And I mean, and he honestly didn't have too much to do except, you know, for throwing Daniel out a window.
It's true.
Which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, that is pretty awesome.
Well, one of the things, even in the revival scene, the monster is clearly a dummy for, like, 3 or 4, like, close shots. It's not even like they're trying to hide it. It's just so obvious, because they wanted to get the sparks coming off of him or something like that. But so it's just sort of, I don't know, it's awkward a little bit, but
it's a shame because, like, Strange definitely fits the suit.
Yeah.
Like, he's physically imposing, and, like, while he does move in that kind of stilted, stiff-legged way, he fills up so much of the screen when he's on that he is a bit of a menace.
Yeah.
And he's a lot more, like, his facial expressions. Like, he's way more expressive than Lugosi and Chaney were. Yeah. And I like, you see that here. And when you watch him, like, break out of the straps, like, it's pretty cool looking. Like, I would have dug, like, a lot more of watching him on screen. So it is kind of disappointing you don't get more of him only for that reason, because I like his performance as the monster.
Yeah.
And want more of that. Like, for the same reasons, like, you and Steven wanted more of, like, the fight last week. Like,
Sure.
hey, like, this would be cool to watch. Like, I wanted another few scenes with, like, Glenn Strange as the monster, because I'm really enjoying him.
I kind of miss the days of the monster terrorizing the countryside.
Yeah.
You know, and I think there's kind of a missed opportunity in a movie called House of Frankenstein to not have that. I mean, there you have the villagers chasing him, but he doesn't really get his chance to create the mayhem like he did in the early films.
Hey, it is called House of Frankenstein, and he does stay in the house. He does not leave. We do not see him outside of the building in this film.
It's really the house of Neiman. I mean, it's really, when you think about it, it's his house. Yeah. A couple notes on the Dracula things here. We talked a bit about it. I think my main performance with, like, John Carradine as Dracula is, like, his attempts at menace come off as feeble. Like, we talked about that standoff with him and Neiman, and when he's like, put down the stake, and Neiman's like, no. And Dracula's response is like, okay.
Damn it, you got me there.
And
you got me.
That elevates Neiman a bit.
It does.
As a character, but it really hurts the aura of Count Dracula. And that shouldn't happen.
And then there's also the whole thing with the prop, the ring. You know, he uses the ring as a way to control her. I can't even remember the character's name. It's so little she's in it. Because I mean, like, the thing about Lugosi was the eyes. You know, the eyes are so hypnotic that they will entrap whoever that he's just looking at. And you can kind of feel that power in that movie. Here, it's like, I don't get it. I mean, not that Universal was ever, you know, too strict on continuity of lore or anything like that, but it's just sort of like, why does Dracula need a magic ring?
You see him when he tries it, it looks ridiculous. Like, his eyes go big.
Yeah.
And it's like, you look silly.
It's like what you're doing right now. You think is sexy. It's not. You know, it's like, again, Lugosi doesn't even need to use his powers if he doesn't have to. He could persuade you on his own versus, this version of Dracula just needs that ring to let you know that you're going steady with Dracula.
And it's so gaudy. It's just like this giant... It's like something that Tony Soprano would wear, right? It's this giant pinky.
And it's just weird. Like, nobody ever, when you think of Dracula lore, everybody's like, oh, yeah, you know Dracula's ring. You know, his trusty ring that he uses so often.
Right. The problem, too, is, like, in both of these movies, in House of Dracula, Dracula is done in by his inability to tell time. Because he puts both of his schemes into motion at like 20 minutes to sunrise, right? Like, the one thing that's going to kill Dracula is the sunrise. And he's like, what if I put this really complicated, time-sensitive plan into motion and give myself like 15 minutes to execute it?
It's pretty silly.
And what I love, too, is when he's making his getaway, and, like, Neiman has told him, you know, like, I'll serve you well. Don't worry about it. I got your back. I'm your bro. We're good. And Dracula's riding to him. And Daniel's like, I got an idea, my man. And he throws Dracula's coffin out of the back. And you see, the one thing I love is Carradine's face when he throws the coffin. And he's like, oh, shit. And it's the Joe Bluth, I made a terrible mistake look. He's like, and then the carriage breaks off. Like, Dracula's own horse breaks off from the carriage. And Dracula goes tumbling into a ditch like a little bitch. It's like all of the allure of Count Dracula. He comes off like such a little boob.
He doesn't have the confidence. Like, it's very funny. Like, if you're Dracula, you kind of have to know you're the shit. And this version of Dracula forgot that he's the shit. And thusly, he gets pushed around for the whole movie. Like, you got to have that confidence.
Like, do you know who should have played this? Like, Jesse Eisenberg or Michael Cera should have played this Dracula. Because they're such little beasts. He's just like,
Man.
he's such a boob in this movie.
I really need
am I
I really
wrong?
need Michael Cera as Dracula now. That's an amazing
Do
image you
you?
put in my brain.
Oh my goodness. I mean, he could probably do it after. What can he'd probably nail it too. He'd probably be amazing. And I'd have to eat my words. So, all right. Do we have any other thoughts, or can we put House of Frankenstein behind us?
I will say the one plus I will give this Dracula is his the reconstitution of his bones into physical form. That effect looked pretty good.
Sure.
Like I will say, looked pretty nice.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to the reconstitution of the Invisible Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool looking. Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, I think we've done it.
Yeah.
We've done 6 of these now. We got a couple left.
Getting close. We're going to make it.
Getting close to the end. We're going to make it. So that is our talk on House of Frankenstein. But before we go, let's do some plugs. And Devaughn, what's going on with the Spectre Cinema Club? It's a new year. It's a new month.
Yeah.
It's the month of romance. I'm sure you got some love going on. What do you got going on?
Yeah, we've been
over
having
there?
some fun. We spent January going over some of the best of 2023, but now we are firmly in 2024, diving into erotic thrillers over there. So we are having some fun. We just covered Double Lover, a French film, but then we're going to be going into some of the heavy hitters like Eyes Wide Shut and Body Double as well. So yeah, we're having fun over there. You can catch me and Garrett McDowell every Tuesday over there, and we also launched our Patreon over on Spectre Cinema. So we're trying to do some big things over here.
Excellent. And where can folks find you?
And you can find me at all the usual places: Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd @_daddydisco.
Great. Brian, how about yourself?
Not much new. So just a reiteration of what I've been saying. We've got our Snowbound episode of Movies for Life with Fargo and The Grey coming up. It should be out when this gets posted. And then yesterday we recorded our Imaginary Friends episode with Harvey and Drop Dead Fred. Then that ended up being a lot of fun. And then I personally have my piece on the Hammer Frankenstein series hitting Manor Vellum sometime this month. And so keep your eyes out for that if you're into that sort of thing. And you can find me in the usual places at Brian Waves 42.
Excellent. Excellent. So for us, you go to podandthependulum.com where you can get all of our back episodes, over 220 plus at this point. All of our franchises are there. It's really easy to go and find anything. It's really nicely arranged. You can also leave us comments there as well. Got some really nice comments there. Also, make sure you are subscribing, rating, and reviewing us wherever you get your podcasts. Really, Apple is the big one. If you head over to Apple, please rate, review, and subscribe to us. I say this every week. Been stuck in 120 for a little while, so I keep making this plea. But if you're new to listening to us, take 2 minutes, take a moment right now, leave us 5 stars and a few kind words. It really goes a long way to Luton listeners finding us. If you've left a review before, but it's been a long time, I think you can leave another review. So maybe go ahead and cheat a little bit and do that. Tell our other listeners or potential listeners why you really like the show. We do have a Patreon page. Go to patreon.com/podandthependulum where we have all of our bonus content. We put bonus episodes up every month. Last month, we didn't cover a movie. Steven and I did Oscar talk. We kind of gave our discussion on some of the nominees. It was something a little bit different. I just kind of felt like it was a fun, loose discussion. Brian and Steven have discussed doing a couple of different things, and we're in the middle. I think we're going to rearrange things a little bit. Ariel's given me some help right there, but we already have about 50 hours of bonus material up right now of full-length episodes. So go to patreon.com/podandthependulum. For as little as $2, there is a ton of bonus material out there. We will be back next week with our latest episode on the Frankenstein series, where we go to the House of Dracula. It's a super fun movie. It really doesn't qualify as a Frankenstein movie.
Apparently, yeah.
And then we go to Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein. Then we go to our next franchise, which will be Paranormal Activity. So we're going back to modern times. I'm very excited. That's one of my favorite series. I have a couple guests lined up already, so I'm pretty psyched to have some discussions on that one. We may have like one episode in between them just to give a little bit of time to do some of the research on a couple of the movies and give ourselves a little bit of breather. I have a bonus episode in the can that we might deploy in between them. But that is it for right now. Before we go, I wanted to say one brief thing. I wanted to say condolences to the friends and family of two icons that passed yesterday on the 2nd of February. We're recording this on the 3rd, so this is going to post a week later, but yesterday we lost Wayne Kramer, the guitarist of the MC5, one of the proto-punk bands from Detroit, one of the greatest guitarists of all time, the MC5, one of the biggest influences for a lot of the music I listen to. So I would cue up Kick Out the Jams today. We're going to end today by playing that song, Kick Out the Jams. That'll be our outro for today. But a longtime guitarist, outspoken activist, but also rest in peace, Mr. Carl Weathers, who passed away. One of the just most charismatic performers in Hollywood history. I mean, Predator, Action Jackson, then that pivot to comedy with Happy Gilmore as Chubbs, and then Arrested Development, playing himself and not afraid to... He really developed that character of himself, saying, I don't want to do Rocky jokes, make me really cheap. Then earning an Emmy for his turn on the Mandalorian, beloved by so many people, but really best known as Apollo Creed, taking a character that really should have been like a one-note foil for Rocky to overcome, and just through like his charisma, his charm, his ability, turning that into like one of the most iconic and beloved characters really in cinema history. Like, Apollo is probably the first movie character death that really hit me as a kid in Rocky 4. And as the accolades and the remembrances have come out, like, no one has a bad thing to say about Carl Weathers. He just seems like universally loved by so many. I just wanted to wish condolences to friends and family. I know it's a week later as this post, but I did want to say something here. So, and that is it. Everybody have a great week, and we'll be back with The House of Dracula. Take care, all.
Right now! Right now! Crazy now, baby, 'cause we all got it down. And when the dressing room got hazy now, baby, I know how you want it, y'all. With that tight, the girls stand standing with you, doing it right, looking up on the stand, and let me kick out the jam. Yes, kick out the jam. I have to kick them out. Yes, I'm starting to sweat, you know my shirt's all wet, what I'm feeling. In the sound that I bounce and resounds and rebounds off the ceiling. You gotta have it, baby, you can't do it without. When you get the feeling, you gotta song them out with that mic in my hand. And let me kick out the jam. Yes, kick out the jam. Kick out. stupid frenzy. The wiggling guitar still, the crash of the bomb, makes me wanna keep a rockin' till morning comes. Let me be who I am, and let me kick out the jam. Yeah, kick out the jam. I done kicked them out.
Shut up, Happy. Don't feel bad about me. I got my hand back, see? We've only just begun to live. White lace and promises, a kiss for luck, and we're